Evan Elkin, who now works as a consultant here at John Jay and as a consultant with several other people, including one potentially big one, which we won't talk about in public. And Evan's going to briefly summarize the report that we've been working on that's starting to be posted on the web. There are 7 sections of it, and 4 of them are basically there. The last one's basically not there. And what we're hoping, it's on the website, and also if you are looking at your devices, we tweeted the hashtag PFISYMP for symposium, PFISYMP. We also sent out this morning the URL for the report, and it's on that little piece of paper. The purpose of the report is to give someone who does not know much about the details of close to home a quick review, but hopefully thorough and fair review. And at the bottom of each section, the comment field is open. So what we're hoping is that people in this room will look at the report even today or certainly as it's completed and make comments, because we will make mistakes. We will make errors of fact and probably errors of attribution and interpretation. If you want, and you could either correct mistakes or you can also add commentary that could actually be put into the report, or we could direct the readers to those comments. So we're hoping that it's a community product if you'd be willing to do that in the comment fields on the report itself. I guess that's all you need to know. So Evan's going to go over the basics of the report in about 10 minutes.
Thank you, Jeff. It's nice to share the podium with my Vera colleagues, and to save a little time not having to plug Vera at the beginning of my... Okay, how's this? Is this a little better? Okay, thanks. So this report represents a year of interviews with stakeholders, the folks we refer to as...
You have to really project.
Okay. A year of interviews with the folks we think of as the architects of this initiative, the stakeholders in the community, folks that were involved in the negotiation of this effort. And I want to thank the report's first author, Laura Negredo, who has returned to Madrid, Spain, but is responsible for much of the interviews and the work on this project. And it was nice to jump in midstream. This has been a fun project. So, as Liz mentioned and others have mentioned, New York State has been advancing a juvenile justice reform process for more than 10 years. And many of the architects of that effort are here in this room. I'm having that reaction on the plane when you see the pilot coming out of the cockpit and you're wondering who's flying the plane. Everybody's here. So I think New York City adolescents must be running wild for these 3 hours right now. But as others have mentioned, the main pillars of these reforms have been an investment in community alternatives to detention and incarceration, and a re-engineering of the way decisions are made, and the use of validated assessment tools so that risk and need are appreciated in a rational balance, and we're not over-incarcerating or over-detaining the wrong young people. The data that Jen Fratello presented suggests that this has been successful for New York City. Declines in juvenile placement over the last 10 years have mirrored a steady increase in the use of these alternatives. There have been declines in arrest, and this has mirrored a national drop in juvenile crime. And I'll leave it to the social scientists in the room to explain how these things interrelate. The statistics and the increasing comfort of New York in not sending kids upstate, but into this tremendous array of alternative programs like Esperanza and JJI, have contributed to a cooling off of any remaining debates there were about reinvestment. So it really seemed like close to home and community reinvestment is really the right thing to do. In the years leading up, as others have mentioned, Gladys Carrion closed upstate facilities, the increasing array of alternatives to placement, adjustments, which is the diversion of young people before they even get to court, have increased under Commissioner Schiraldi's watch to record numbers. It seemed like a perfect storm for close to home. Creating a locally operated system where incarcerated youth could stay closer to their families looked on paper to be the right next move in the story. But has close to home really been about continuing the reforms initiated a decade ago and moving continually toward realignment, or so far has it just been about a reassignment of a management role for the residential placement system? Has New York City really gotten what it bargained for? In a city that's known for dressing up its juvenile jails with cynically euphemistic names like horizons and bridges and crossroads, many have been a little bit wary about the concept of close to home. And terms like home-like, which became a frequent public relations term in the lead up to close to home. Would this really magically lead to better outcomes, or would it inspire judges to fill beds? And we know that beds are full. I think it's too soon to talk about outcomes. Many stakeholders are concerned that the Close to Home initiative may have distracted or derailed momentum from what's been building for the last decade. That government systems, community-based organizations that have retooled their missions around this idea of keeping young people safely in their communities are now preoccupied with running juvenile detention facilities and juvenile placement facilities. And overall, it's difficult to dispute that not having facilities 7 hours away is a good thing. Many of us in the room were program developers and policymakers in the pre-close to home era, and a lot of what we did felt like what amounted to workarounds and band-aids to compensate for the crazy practice of sending youth 7 hours away for uniformly long sentences. I think in those days everyone got 18 months no matter what, and to places that the data showed had very little rehabilitative value. We can all cite the famous Bruce Frederick study, chapter and verse, and the fact that kids coming home from upstate facilities were eventually going to go back was a fact that we all sort of, with learned helplessness, just learned to accept, no matter how good and innovative we were. So this piece of the close-to-home theory of change that suggests that physical proximity is a good thing, that if you keep people closer to families and to neighborhoods, that treatment providers can get there and visit them by subway, all of the sort of structural, logistical things, it's a sensible hypothesis, but we don't know yet if that's actually going to work. So the success of pushing this through, no question it's a clear win for New York City, for youth and families. Most people that we spoke to for this report don't feel that this thing actually had anything to do with geography, meaning where the beds are, but that it was about the ultimate goal of continuing what they started, which was an investment in community alternatives. Almost to a person, the government officials and other informants we spoke to for this report told us as much. Some senior officials, and I like using this euphemistic language, I wish I could just point at the people who said these things, really feel like if we could get the community programs to be as effective as we want them, that they would render juvenile placement for all but the most seriously risky kids completely unnecessary. More than one person told us that that was their vision for close to home, not really bringing buildings closer to where children are arrested. 2 years into the initiative, New York City is operating a relatively expensive system, and placement rates have not significantly been impacted by close to home, and the array of community-based alternatives to incarceration that have been phased in under close to home remains somewhat underutilized. So was it reasonable to assume that close to home could simultaneously build a best practice placement system and keep kids out of it at the same time? So obviously something of an oversimplification, but this and other core assumptions about the initiative are worth pressuring today. First, there was great debate among the architects of close to home about the assumption that New York City's child welfare system could handle this new role and the major culture shift that comes along with something like this, that the capacities of the child welfare agencies that came to the table would translate smoothly into an engaging and kinder, gentler juvenile placement system. And moreover, that the juvenile placement systems who won the contracts for non-secure placement settings could launch in time. This was a very compressed time frame. Others can talk about specifics, but in my understanding, it was just a matter of several months from approval to getting this thing on the ground. So growing pains notwithstanding, most, as Liz mentioned, didn't anticipate the number of AWOLs that are continuing to be a problem, the degree to which the agencies who are handling placement are relying, some say too heavily, on punitive responses to behavior, struggling to adjust to this complicated new role. So most agree that the initiative was too rushed, but the mad dash was unavoidable, that it likely wouldn't have happened and the initiative would have died on the vine if the time frame wasn't as fast as it was. Another key assumption, touched on briefly earlier, and perhaps the most controversial one, is whether this thing was about saving money, whether close to home was designed to save New York City taxpayer dollars. Some senior New York City officials deny it was ever part of the calculus. The people here at this symposium don't need a history lesson, but setting the stage for this, New York City took the unprecedented step of suing the state over the increasing cost of a bed and of an empty bed in a juvenile placement facility. Most agree that this kind of thinking, the cost-benefit conversation, was critical in pushing this forward. So if New York City thought taking control of a juvenile placement system was going to result in a less costly, more effective system, which we hope that it does, close to home is lagging significantly behind. By all accounts, close to home is just as expensive as the system it's replaced, and is not yet producing any reinvestable cost savings. And senior officials tell us this is potentially some years away. There are, however, significant wins for close to home. Getting the thing to happen at all in the famously compressed time frame was pretty incredible, in getting everyone to the table. There's a video, as you'll see when you get into our report online, where we have Commissioner Schiraldi saying everyone was in the room, which was true. Everybody was involved, and pulling this off was quite an incredible feat. And this isn't breaking news, but the school piece has been remarkably successful. Again, those of us who were around in the pre-close to home era never thought this was going to happen, but credits are following kids home. Kids are not losing credits. Kids are graduating. I remember you had to get Chris Tan to muscle up and sue everybody under the sun if you wanted to get a kid back in school from residential placement. And now there's something, Joshua, you can correct me if this term is wrong, something like a welcome committee, which was just something unheard of in pre-close to home. So now with 2 years under its belt and a new government administration, many are encouraged that close to home is kind of at its own crossroads, and we really are eager to hear from the panelists about where we're heading. Thanks.